You know, it was fantastic to go back to work. It really was. I missed it very much for, it was almost 2 years between the periods. And what was strange for me is it split a tour for us here with Iron Maiden. Legacy of the Beast stopped, and it was supposed to continue on until 2020. We didn't do 2020 and 2021, and then we resumed the same tour in 2022. So it felt like that tour was 5 years long, because of the 2 years that were in the middle of it. But it was really great to get back to work, And then this tour is an all-new, brand-new tour. It's different than Legacy of the Beast. It's the Future Past tour. That is what I love about what I do. I was a recording engineer and a producer, and I worked in studios in Los Angeles in the late 80s and early 90s. You don't get any feedback in the studio, but I fell in love with that, instant gratification that happens when fans are cheering for something. When you push a guitar solo and, fans cheer, you had a part in that, even though it's the guitar player playing, you pushing that fader and pushing that solo was part of that. So yeah, it's exciting. I did utilize a lot of time at home mixing some records and mixing some things and working on some plugins that I'd not used before, just to, experiment. And then, I was doing a podcast and actually several podcasts, and so got into that whole world and how the sound of that works. But yeah, this particular tour, when I came back, there were a couple of analog pieces that I added to this tour that weren't there previously on the last tour. One was a Neve master bus converter, and the other one was a Sonic Farm Creamliner, which is, both of those things are analog devices that just kind of add a little harmonic distortion to the whole thing and transformer sound. So taking a digital console, processing it through some analog stuff to give it some harmonic distortion. Those were kind of what I came back from the coronavirus. We have on the front end of this, we use the Neve RMP D8 mic pre's, which are basically the same transformer that's in Neve desks. And then it converts it to Dante and sends a signal to our digital consoles. So we are utilizing the front end part of our whole thing here is those Neve mic pre's, which have nice warm, resolution and great harmonic distortion. Changing the whole front end of your mix it changes everything. I always say that the fundamentals are important, right? The mic choice, mic placement, and then mic pre and high pass filtering. Like, those are the 4 things that can make your mix, be great or not so great. And one of those things is the mic pre front end part of that. If you have a bad one of those, it's hard to get around. There's several digital mic pre's out there that sound very, very digital. It's gotten a lot better in the last 5 years, let's say. Most front end of most professional desks sound pretty good, but there's still some out there that sound pretty, digital, and so it's nice to have some roundness and some harmonic distortion on the front end part of my mix. It's funny, I own all the equipment here at Front of House, so I rent it to the band, and I bought this desk probably 7 or 8 years ago. And then I upgraded it to the Quantum engines. So this is actually a Q7 with the SD Surface. And for me, it has all the things that I need. Great sounding front end, great, summing, and just endless amounts of tools, lots of DSP. And I'm very fast on it now that I've used it for the last 8 years or so. So when they added the mustard and the chili processing into the desk, which came with the Quantum, that changed a lot. I have probably, I'd say, I don't know, maybe 40% of my channels have some sort of mustard processing or chili processing on them. The chili is the dynamic processing, like a dynamic compressor, and then the mustard processing is EQ and high-pass filtering, which do sound different than the traditional SD channel. So you can kind of have both. They have a lot more harmonic distortion and a lot more pleasing distortion than mustard. But there's some things that I want to be clean, and that's what's great, is having the option to use both, you know, something that has distortion on it, and then another input like keys, for example. I want those to be totally clean. I don't want any harmonic distortion on the front end of that, or on the, you know, on the output of that even. I want them to be totally clean, have some harmonic distortion on bass guitar, guitars, kick drum, snare drum, and that kind of thing. So yeah, totally, the processing that they've added here is amazing. I tend to stick to the plugins that I've used over the years for a long time. You know, my Desert Island plugin is an F6. It's a dynamic EQ. Use that on quite a bit on things. I tend to like models of older gear. So there are some great things that Waves have built in their own GUI and their own sound, and even some artist stuff like, you know, Jack Joseph Puig's drums and that kind of thing sounds great. But what I'm used to is like an LA2A. When I used to mix analog, and I've been mixing for 30 years now, I used to have a rack of LA2As. So I tend to go that way plugin wise. Like, I like the models of what's there. So like on guitars, I use the CLA3A, which is based on the LA3A. On vocals, an LA2A is always on there. And then C6 and F6, those are my biggies. Yeah. I don't even remember like how I did things without an F6 or a C6. You know, it's those tools are pretty invaluable. You know, the most important input in your rack is vocal, right? You know, people go away, walk away, and if they didn't hear the vocal all night long, and they didn't, you know, it wasn't intelligible, it wasn't nice sounding, those are the people that are going to say, oh, it didn't sound very good. Now, you know, guitars, bass, and drums, they're all important, right? Like, you need to have impact with all those things. But if the vocal isn't right, you're done. So one of the major thing that I do that pushes that vocal forward, well, there's a couple things. One is on the band bus is a F6, and fed to its side chain is the vocal. And then I notch out certain frequencies in that react to the vocal, and they're in mid-side, which means that it's only affecting the center of your mix, not affecting anything on the outside. So everything is panned a little bit, guitars and, you know, everything, keys, you know, overheads, drums, whatever, are panned away from the center. So creating this pocket in the band bus where it compresses, and sometimes it gets down into 9 dB at 1K, let's say, with a relatively wide filter, but it's very fast attack, very fast release, so you don't hear it. If I took the vocal away or muted it in the PA but sent it to that compressor still, you would hear it doing things in the guitars and kind of making them squishy, but you don't hear it when the vocal is there. It's making space for that vocal. That really punches the vocal forward. So sending the vocal sidechain and mid-side to an F6, that's always been my trick to get vocals over the top. The second thing I use is there's a Neve master bus processor in there, and I really love, there's a little section in it. It's a compressor and a limiter. I don't use it as a compressor and a limiter. The output side of it has this spreading feature where you can select certain frequencies and either push them forward or back, or push them wider or narrower. And what I do is take my mid frequencies and spread them pretty wide, and then I push my low end forward at you. It feels that way. So that device makes kind of this roundish mix space. And with that compressor in the center doing what I just talked about, it opens up the space for that vocal, and when the vocal's gone, all of that gets pushed forward. So you're feeling like impact of band, and then vocal happens, and you're still hearing all the impact of the band, but in the center of the PA is all about making the vocals sound great. And so between those two things, and it's super fine line with those. This is like me spending a lot of time with, you know, virtual playback and those kind of things to get it right. Yeah, it's between those two things, that's really my trick to getting a vocal out front. And that's what I'm doing here. It's a frequency notch, but it's only in the center of your mix, and it's not affecting other things too much. Since it's fast dip, so whenever he's singing, it's dipping a little bit. It kind of makes the mix do this a little bit, like get wide when he sings. And it's just an amazing tool for getting the vocal out front, for sure. We do a fair amount of festivals and where we don't get to use our PA. So I would say 40% of the time I'm not on my PA. And that's difficult, but it just means that you have to have your mix together for all different kinds of situations. I'm blessed with an amazing system engineer. His name's Mike Hackman, and a great crew chief named Tim Peeling. Both of those guys get me to what I need. They use Smart, for instance, look at the normal trace that we do every day, and force another type of PA to be in that trace. So I have a starting point that sounds similar to this PA. This PA, the Cohesion, we have Co 12 and Co 10. The 12-inch speaker in this lends to guitars. This band has 3 guitar players. It's just a great box for a rock and roll band. And I actually use it on my pop acts that I do as well. You know, I do a rap artist named Travis Scott, and we use the same thing. We just add more subs, and it's just a really, really great linear box. You know, when I'm looking for out of a PA is from 200 all the way out to 16K, let's say. I want it to be linear and let me be the guy that does the mix that changes things within that. I don't necessarily, if you're looking at a Smart trace, I don't want it to be like this, you know, which are a lot of presets. You know, they set it like this. You know, I want it to be this. I want to be linear, me control the high end. It makes sense to me coming from being a studio guy, right? You know, near field monitors. I want these to be big, giant near fields. That's what I want. And just recently, I would say in the last 6 to 7 years, we've gotten to that point where the speakers are really giant, you know, near field monitors. And so I've kind of come full circle as an engineer, you know, coming back to what I started with. And so it's been great. One of the guitar players switched this year to a fractal. So we're kind of coming up in the equipment world. But yes, most of their stuff is older things. Even the guy that's using the fractal is still putting it through a Marshall amp. So, yes, older technology, but great sounding. You know, what's coming off the stage is fantastic. I just have to make it louder, you know, which I do. The hardest thing about this band is that there is 3 guitar players that all share the same frequency range. They all play Strats, they all play through Marshalls, they all have that tone, you know, that is known for a Strat and a Marshall. So how do you make that distinctly, you know, how do you hear each individual guy? And what I do is place them where they are on stage. So Davey, who's on stage left, or sorry, stage right, you know, he's pretty panned left. Then Adrian's kind of in the middle, and Yannick is panned pretty far right. That's the normal sitting place where they are. When they solo, I have snapshots that bring them to the center. When they're done soloing, they go back to their spot. But keeping them in these 3 spots really makes it so that you can definitely hear all 3 guys. You can pick them out in the mix. And, you know, the side hangs are a flip of the left and right, so that the people over here on this side still get Davey, even though he's, you know, playing over there. So that's how we get around that, the hard panning of that. Well, that's always the question is like, well, if you hard pan things, you know, I mean, when I say hard pan, I'm talking like 9 o'clock, right? Like 9:30 and 2:30, you know, is where I place guitars. But, you know, if we didn't have that side hanging, you know, that's flipped left and right, you would lose a little bit if you were sitting over here from Davey. So that's why we do that. That's a really great question because they do go from, you know, 1982 song to a 2022 song, you know, and they are very different sounding records. What I try to capture is the essence of the song, right? So I do thin out some things when they play some of the older songs that are in the 80s. I make them a little bit thinner because that's how the record sounds compared to now. Not much. It's my interpretation, live interpretation of the record, but you have to capture the things, you know, I'm a fan of Iron Maiden, so I listened to those records when I was a kid, you know, 1982, you know, I was 14 years old, and so I, you know, listened to those records, and I know them intensely, and I also know what parts of those things fans enjoy. And so if it's a guitar solo, for instance, you know, it's iconic Adrian guitar solo, you know, I make sure that that is big, proud, and loud, you know, and it may not sound exactly like the record, but it has the essence of the record and therefore, you know, able to make the fans happy, you know. But it is a fine line trying to walk that, you know, between then and now, you know. It's tough. You know, there are 9 toms, and so that's 9 open microphones, you know, all pointing at stuff, you know, at each other, pointing at cymbals, you know, all those kind of things. So what I did when I showed up to mix this band in 2018 was put triggers on all of the toms. And the triggers are actually triggering the opening of gates. They don't trigger any sounds. The actual sound is the real acoustic sound of the drummer, of the drum itself, of the tom itself. So the trigger itself is just triggering the opening of a gate. And what that does is kind of keep all those toms closed, so all those microphones are not open until it's actually struck. And by having the trigger, it actually is a lot cleaner than trying to use a gate and even trying to use, you know, some high pass and low pass filtering on the gate to try to find the center of that. A trigger seems to work better than that. It only opens when you strike that tom. And so that alone eliminated 9 microphones right off the bat, which is great because now I can build, you know, kick, snare, hat, and overheads to be the focus of the kit. And when the toms come in, they're big, loud, and proud because I can turn the microphone up now that I've you know, eliminated them in the general playing time. But you know, they are set pretty loose though. You know, there are definitely moments where he'll hit a tom and it'll open the gate next to the next tom next to it. And that is so that when he plays dynamically, you know, when he's really whacking it or he's just barely touching it, I want that gate to open. I want it to feel good with dynamics, you know. You can't just have the gate only open when he's really whacking it. And so that too takes a lot of time, a lot of finesse with virtual playback, spending hours, you know, listening to the same tom roll over and over, just, you know, trying fine-tuning little things to get it to sound good. So the other thing is mic choice, you know, for all the drums. My overheads are a big part of my drum sound, and those are the Mojave 201 FETs. They're just, I can't, it's hard to describe. I tell engineers all the time, it's like something about that microphone. It's it captures the drum kit, it captures the cymbals, it captures all the stuff that I want and doesn't make it harsh or any of those things, which, you know, I like 414s, but they tend to be a little bit harsh with, you know, cymbals and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I've found with the Mojave, it just, you know, I can capture the whole drum kit in that overhead sense. So yeah, that's drums. I've worked with this same monitor engineer for the last 20 years. We've done probably 15 or 20 bands together, major bands. We're kind of like an old married couple. His name's Kevin Tater McCarthy, and he's an amazing monitor engineer. We are so in sync with each other, we don't even talk to each other during the day. We know when he's gonna check his monitors, he knows when I'm gonna check my stuff. We just function like that. We function like a couple, honestly. You know, we know what the other one is gonna do, you know, it's a really great experience to keep working with him. So we share racks, so there's only one stage rack up there. We make decisions together about microphones and their placement. So it is not a separate thing. We are definitely working together as a team. I think each guy has a different thing. You know, the guitar players are all on ears, so they have their own mix. You know, Steve Harris is the only guy that doesn't like wear earplugs or anything, so much of the stage is set for his mix. Bruce wears earplugs, always has, so that he can hear, you know, his chest and his gut from the inside, so he wears earplugs, and then with loud wedges. With his vocal loud wedges, and he's done that for, you know, since he's been in the band, and it works well for him. So yeah, other than that, I'm not too sure about what's going on up there. I'm not a monitor guy. This band treats me with great respect, with great honor, with great teamwork. When we do rehearsals, we spend up to a month in rehearsals, sometimes 3 to 4 weeks of rehearsals before every leg, every year. There's lots of collaboration, and I love it. They come in, they say, oh, you know, I like that part. Can you make it, you know, brighter? You can make it, you know, whatever. So there's this back and forth and respect between each other that is hard to find. That's a hard thing to find with bands. So, you know, I've said this before on other interviews, you know, I'll stay here as long as they'll have me. They treat me with great respect, and I love mixing them. There's moments that I'm transported back to being 15 years old, you know, in my bedroom listening to an Iron Maiden record, you know. I'm sitting here mixing going, man, you know, I am blessed to be in this situation, to work with a band that I was a fan of when I was a kid. You know, I've had an amazing life. We did a YouTube channel called Pooch and Raybold, so go search that in YouTube. It's during the COVID times, me and another front of house engineer named Chris Raybold started having video conferences, and we basically just taped them and threw them up there and see if people would enjoy. And it's kind of turned into a thing. It's been really great. Some people have said that they've really enjoyed it. So if you haven't found that yet, go find that. We did another thing called Wrong End of the Snake, which was Tater and I. That's another YouTube thing. Interviewing stars, like we interviewed Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park, and that was another kind of project during the times. I got a masterclass. If you're into that, you know, you can just search for, you know, Pooch and masterclass and find that. And then, you know, I constantly love giving back to the community. So check out my Instagram, check out my Facebook. I try to post things there as much as I can.